But I just hope you like the pictures. I hope you like the pictures for a job.
Tapos meron pang Legazpi Park. Hindi sa'yo.
Teka. Cesar,
Hello, I'm in.
Hello, good afternoon.
Attorney Diokno, thank you for being here on time. We will be starting the program in a little while. Thank you for being with us.
Welcome. I have some slides that I'll use later. Pa-screen share, pa-share screen na lang ako mamaya.
Sige po, sir. We will do that.
Thank you.
All right, it is 2:01. We're going to start, Mr. President. We're going to start. Am I correct here? All right. Let's start the program. Friends, welcome to the meeting of the Rotary Club of Makati. Today is August 18, and first part of the program, I am Reggie Nolido, past President Reggie Nolido, who will be your moderator for today's meeting. And first part of the program, we'd like to ask our President, President Peter Manzano, to please call the meeting to order. Thank you, President Peter. Next part of our program is the invocation. The invocation will be given by Rotarian George Barcelon. George? Yes.
We cannot hear her.
Yeah. Ron, I don't think we can hear George.
Ka-face shields.
Okay, let us now have the Philippine National Anthem.
We're the Rotary Club of Makati, and together we stand proud. building goodwill and peace along the way, giving hope to the world. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, prepared to aid our fellow men, as through Rotarians we live to lead. We believe in service above self, and this is why we succeed. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, and together we stand proud. We are leaders with integrity, always ready to serve humanity, always living by the four-way test, building goodwill and peace along the way, giving hope to the world. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, giving hope to the world. The Rotary Club of Makati.
Thank you. At this point, let us now recite the four-way test. Of all the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Will it
Will it
build
goodwill and better
better
friendships?
friendship?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Will it be
Will it be
beneficial?
beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We can now proceed to the rest of the program. At this point, we'd like to call on past District Governor Tony Quila for recognition of major donors. I'm very happy to note that our governor is here, Gov Chacha. Gov Chacha, we are presenting to you two major donors who are going to be honored today.
Good afternoon. Wow, that's really wonderful.
Gov Tony, the floor is yours.
Paul and President Peter, I'm going to pick his sixth Paul Harris Fellow. So he will get a pin with 5 blue firestones.
Congratulations, President Peter.
Go, Peter, go.
Then if you stay, because you will award the major donor of George for tonight. George? Also for agree. And I also has a pendant.
Oh, okay.
So dalawa. Ganda lang. And then your necklace.
Full works.
And your We have 23 donors in the club. I think the number of major donors for the club in the district is an club in the Philippines. And I have more prospects coming. And the Galvez, our President Peter himself, and Drex, lagi. Very persuasive. Captured market. That is persuasive. Persuasive. That's true. Sige, thank you. Thank you.
Ojo, PD Reggie. Wala pa rin, kuya.
All right. At this point, we'd like to call on President Peter to give his president's time.
Thank you, Pipi Reggie. All right. Last week, our Chief of Staff, Ron Dotaro, and Project Coordinator, Ria Vallejo, met with a group of Rotary Homes residents to discuss and assess their needs in the face of the
Ojo, cos.
Silent mode.
Peter, I can't hear you.
Silent mode. Naka-silent mode ka, Peter.
Peter, I can't hear you.
You're on silent mode, Peter.
You're on mute, Peter.
Ron.
All right.
Peter, bakit you're on silent mode.
All right, I'll start all over again.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Good, you're good.
All right,
You're
a report on the Rotary Homes Needs Assessment. Last week, our Chief of Staff, Ron Dotaro, and Project Coordinator, Ria Vallejo, met with a group of Rotary Homes residents to discuss and assess their needs in the face of the prevailing situation and what the club can do to help the community. As we all know, Rotary Homes has been one of the club's beneficiaries since its creation by the leaders of District 3830, led by our own PDG Sid Garcia, working in tandem with the Parañaque City Government to save the Parañaque River from impending death. The District 3830 Parañaque Government Partnership led to the donation by the city government of a piece of property in Parañaque that has become Rotary Homes, a resettlement area for families living on the banks of the dying Parañaque River. Our club's most visible contribution are the houses as well as the community center we have built for the residents. Last week on July 14, the club board held its second monthly meeting. In said meeting, the board approved the following projects. First, the My First Teacher project proposed by PP Reggie Nolido, which is a program that seeks to teach parents how to teach their kids to read. With the help of our Rotaractors and community partners, seminars are to be conducted to train and teach parents how to teach their own kids with the use of teaching materials and the teaching tools. Second, the Bike to Work Buddies Partnership Project with the Rotary Club of Parañaque Metro, Rotary Shuttle Club of Parañaque Metro Stars, and the Rotary Club of Parañaque Metro, together with the Rotary Club of St. Andrew and its Rotary Community Corps. This bicycle project is for the breadwinners, salaried employees, potentially self-employed skilled workers, wage earners in Parañaque, and the goal is to initially award 25 units of brand new bicycles with protective accessories and expand engagement with the Pay Forward scheme, rapid savings mobilization, and strategic partnerships for viability and sustainability. The board likewise approved the renewal of our sisterhood agreement with RC Shanghai, the implementation of our COVID relief project with the Ateneo de Manila University, and the release of the budget for the HEAL program, which we'll be doing later, and the crafting of a commemorative book to mark our 55th club anniversary. The board also discussed plans for growing and maintaining membership with the help of our younger members, the solar lamps making Light It Forward joint project proposal by our daughter club RCM Business District, and a reef rehabilitation project initially agreed upon in principle among our club, the Rotary Club of Parañaque, the RC Makati Paseo de Rojas, and the RC Makati Salcedo, which we intend to extend to other clubs in the district. Together with 18 other Rotary clubs from 5 Rotary districts, our club will be co-hosting the club meeting of our daughter club, RC Makati Poblacion, courtesy of my classmate, Fernan Mabanta, with Governor Chis Escudero as the guest of honor and speaker on Thursday, August 20 at 11:30 a.m. So let us show our support to our daughter club by participating in their club meeting on Thursday. We shall be circulating the Zoom links to you shortly after our meeting. Finally, our club's induction of these Rotary Years officers, directors, and advisors will proceed as planned on August 28, Friday, 6 p.m. at the clubhouse in our Rotary Foundation building. With the government's announcement that Metro Manila will be under a more relaxed GCQ starting August 19, we plan to do a blended type of induction where the inductees and some Rotarians and guests will be physically present in our clubhouse while the others will be joining us online. So see you all on August 28. That is for me. Thank you, PP Reggie.
Thank you, President Peter. Clearly, the club is poised to do a lot of things. So I hope that we have a lot of participation from our members. All right. At this point, we'd like to call on Rotarian Rex Lagi to introduce our guest speaker, who happens to be my favorite MCLE lecturer. So, Rex, take it away. All right. Looks like some technical difficulties. Rex, are you ready to come on? There you go. You are on mute, my friend.
You guys hear me now? All right?
Okay.
Cool,
Yeah.
Mr. President? Okay. Magandang hapon. I'd like to introduce, it's my privilege and honor to introduce Dean Jose Manuel Diokno, who is the founding Dean of the De La Salle University College of Law and the chair of the Free Legal Assistance Group, or FLAG. He has been practicing law for 30 years and has gained prominence as a human rights lawyer and litigator. In 2012, he was shortlisted by the Judicial Bar Council for the position of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. In 2013, he was appointed to the Supreme Court Committee of the National Conference for the Revision of Rules of Civil Procedure and chaired the Post-Trial Cluster Technical Working Group. In 2017, he served as a member of the Technical Working Group of the Supreme Court Committee on Continuing Legal Education in Bar Matters and the Philippine Association of Law Schools. In this capacity, he headed the Cluster on Networking and Coordination, participated in the first National Summit for Legal Aid in Law Schools in May 2017, taking part as well in the drafting of the proposed guidelines for the establishment and operation of legal aid clinics in law school. The DLSU College of Law, which opened in 2017, is the first law school in the Philippines to highlight human rights and legal aid as part of its educational program. I'm also proud to add that that DLSU College of Law, fellow members of Rotary contributed to its success, like, for example, the Rufino family and George Barcelon. Hello, George. So, and the FLAG, or the Free Legal Assistance Group, is the oldest organization of human rights lawyers in the Philippines. Established in 1974, FLAG is known for handling cases involving civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. FLAG also spearheaded a campaign to abolish the death penalty. Dean Diokno has conducted training courses and written training manuals for the Department of Justice, the Office of the Ombudsman, the Public Attorney's Office, and other lawyers' groups. He has also trained journalists, law enforcers, human rights defenders, church workers, and the urban poor. Again, I'd also like to add that Dean Diokno has also is still a member of our group, which is helping the Commission of Human Rights establish a proper forensics procedure manual. The forensics fields include ballistics, autopsies of dead bodies, as well as digital forensics. Now, as a training expert, he has worked with the Euro-Philippines Justice Support Program, the International Labor Organization, the American Bar Association, the Millennium Challenge Account Philippines, the British Embassy, and the Asia Foundation, among others. In 2015, the Asian Development Bank engaged his services as a fiscal autonomy expert in the project entitled Capacity Development for the Judiciary and Justice Sector Agencies, comprising the Constitutional Fiscal Autonomy Group. Now, I could go on and on. He has a pretty extensive background, but I would like to tell the detractors of Dean Diokno out there that he is more than just a pretty face. He can bite evil at the very roots. He can gnaw at the tentacles of falsehood to release truth for all of us Filipinos. Thank you.
Dean Diokno, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the Rotary Club of Makati for this opportunity to interact with you in this time of COVID. President Peter Manzano, officers and members of the Rotary Club of Makati, and all Rotarians. It's really a good occasion for us to talk about governance and human rights, because there are so many, what would we call, fake news that is going around, especially about human rights. And it's a good opportunity for us to really separate what is true from what is not, and so that we can see the reality of the situation we are in. So I really welcome this opportunity to talk about these two topics, which really are very much connected with each other. I have some slides, so let me, if I can share screen here. When we talk about good governance, there are many different indicators of what is good governance, but I think we could summarize them into just 5. When you speak of a good government, you're talking about a government that is transparent, that has accountability, that is participatory, that respects the rule of law, and probably most important, that is responsive to the needs of the people. And I think any government in any country in the world could be judged by these 5 factors. When we speak, of course, of good governance, we are talking about how authority is wielded by the state. And as we know in our country and in many other democratic countries, that authority emanates from the people. So all authority of the government comes from us, and as they say, sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. In fact, according to the UN, good governance, I quote, assures that corruption is minimized, that the views of minorities are considered, and that the voices of the most vulnerable are heard in decision-making. Good governance relates to the political and institutional processes and outcomes that are necessary to achieve the goals of development. Especially in a country like ours, where we have a big gap between the rich and the poor, between the marginalized and the voiceless on the one hand, and the powerful and the mighty on the other, good governance is really essential, because otherwise it would just continue the implementation of a status quo that is inherently unequal. When we speak of human rights, of course, there's a lot of myths about human rights, a lot of false information. But basically, when we talk about human rights, it is really the only thing that differentiates us from animals. According to my father, acknowledged to be the father of human rights in our country, human rights are what make us human. We deny them, and we deny our humanity. And I would ask you to imagine a world without human rights. Because if we had a world without human rights, governments and people could discriminate, they could humiliate, they could slut shame, they could torture, they could rape, they could kill, they could commit genocide and crimes against humanity and other atrocities with utter impunity. It is what human rights is what keeps us from degenerating into people or beings that commit these kinds of atrocities. But sometimes it's very hard for us to grasp this concept of human rights because there are so many rights. Meron right to education, right to health, right to life, right to a living wage, right to own property, and so forth. Napakarami niyan. There's a very easy formula that I learned from my dad that I think is a very good way to understand human rights. First, he said that as individuals, all of us, regardless of to whom we are born, regardless of our color, our race, our religion, all of us have three basic individual rights. The most basic, of course, is the right to life, without which we could not enjoy any other rights. But it's not enough to have a life if we cannot have a life with dignity, because in fact, that is what differentiates us from animals. So the second basic right we have as an individual is the right to be treated with dignity. And third, of course, is the right to develop to our full potential, because when we are born, we're given talents by God that each of us are unique and peculiar to every one of us. And we have a right to use those talents not only for ourselves or our families, but for our community and for our nation. But we live in a society. So just as we have individual rights, we also have collective rights. As an individual, I have a right to life. Collectively, as a people, we have a right to survive. That is why our Constitution prohibits nuclear weapons in our territory. Just as an individual, I have a right to dignity. As a people, we have the right to self-determination, meaning that we as a people decide the direction of our country, how we will develop, and no other country can dictate to us what we should be doing in our nation. And third, just as an individual, I have a right to develop. As a people, we also have a similar right collectively to develop. And I think we must understand that human rights is both an international and a national concept. Bago pa tayo naging miyembro ng United Nations, bago pa tayo pumirma ng mga treaty at pumirma din sa Universal Declaration of Human Rights way back as early as 1899 when Mabini wrote our very first constitution, we already recognized these basic rights. The right to life, to liberty, freedom of expression, to association, to petition the government, even to travel, liberty of abode, to be free from unreasonable arrest, search, and seizure, to privacy, to own property, and to education. In other words, from the time of Mabini, from the time of Rizal, our heroes have envisioned a free and independent republic where sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. And just as that developed in our country, or in the world, that same concept of human rights gained a lot of ground, especially after World War II, because of all the genocide, all the crimes against humanity and atrocities that accompanied that war, gave birth actually to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and later on to many treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and cultural rights. In the same way that our Constitution today, just like the Malolos Constitution, has a National Bill of Rights, internationally, they acknowledge that these three treaties you see on the left side of the screen, the Universal Declaration, the International Covenant on Civil and Economic Rights, form the International Bill of Rights. In fact, if you think about it, human rights is really all about accountability and empowerment. It's about accountability because it's a restriction on the state. As early as 1899, Mabini recognized that while government authority comes from us, it is very possible, if not likely, that some government officials will abuse that authority. That because they will have the vast machinery of their and resources of government behind them, that they could easily give in to the temptation to be corrupt, to the temptation to be abusive. And that is why he put in the Bill of Rights as our protection, the people's protection from an overreaching state. And that's why we talk about human rights as accountability. Because when the state, when government officials violate our basic rights, then they should and they must be held accountable. But human rights is really more than that, because it's also about empowering the poor and the marginalized. When a court recognizes the right of an indigenous person, of a fisher folk, of ordinary laborer, we, the state, are giving that person power. We are empowering them. And that is so important in a country where we have such a big gap between the powerful and the voiceless. And that's why the connection to me between human rights and good governance is so intimate. It's really a very close connection between the two. But sad to say, as a human rights lawyer for the last 30 years, it's very clear that human rights and us human rights defenders are presently under attack. You just look at the screen and you look at the statements that come from, many of them come from very high, if not the highest officials in our government. You will notice that they have a very little, maliit talaga ang tingin nila pagdating sa karapatang pantao. In fact, they distinguish between human rights on the one hand and human lives on the other, when the real truth is that human rights is all about human life. It's all about human life and living as human beings with dignity. That's why it really saddens me to see these statements going around and to see a lot of people believing them and accepting that human rights mean nothing, and that in fact that we are the reason why there's so much crime and corruption in the country. But I have to ask this, because to me it's so important. Are human rights defenders really to blame for the criminal syndicates that operate in our country with impunity? Are we really to blame for the widespread corruption that never seems to stop? Every day we have seen millions, if not billions, of people's money being bled from the government and put into the pockets of many of those in government. Kami ba talaga ang may kasalanan yan? I think if you really discern the situation, you will realize that the real culprit is our weak justice system. That is what prevents us from punishing these people. That is what prevents us from apprehending them in the first place and prosecuting them before convicting them. Kaya nakakalusot yung mga drug lord, yung mga big fish, is because they take advantage, and they have been taking advantage of our weak justice system for decades. And that is partly because our government officials have not put justice in our national agenda. Our politicians don't even want to talk about justice. They don't want to strengthen the justice system. Why? Because just like human rights, justice is about accountability. Palagay ko lang ay natatakot sila na kung may pananagutan, baka sila pang maunang makulong. And second, justice is about empowerment. And they don't want an empowered electorate, because if the electorate is empowered, they probably won't vote for them in the next election. To me, if our government is really serious about stopping drug syndicates, stopping terrorism, stopping other kinds of criminal operations, The solution is not to blame human rights defenders, insult them, or curse them. And the solution is not to bring back the death penalty. The real and only and lasting solution to the problem of organized crime and corruption is to strengthen our justice system. And that is good governance, because that is a lasting solution. One of the reasons why I became a public persona was not because I have any political ambitions, but because precisely of this reason. I could not accept the fact that my children and their children will grow up in a society or in a country where we cannot have justice. That they will grow up in a country where there is absolute impunity, where big fish can get away with anything they want. Hindi ko matanggap yon, because that is the antithesis of what our ancestors, our forefathers and foremothers fought so hard for. What is wrong with our justice system? Well, the numbers don't lie. This is all based on data, evidence-based po ito. We have very low conviction rate. 30% more or less is our conviction rate. In other words, only 3 out of 10 persons prosecuted for crime even get convicted. We have no monitoring system to ensure that those convicted actually serve their sentence. There was a study made by a foreign funding agency some years back. They wanted to know, out of everybody convicted of graft and corruption offenses in the Sandigan Bayan, how many are actually serving their sentence? They could only account for 10 out of 110. Yung 100 na dapat nasa loob ng kulungan, hindi nila malaman kung nasaan. We have a disgustingly slow pace of litigation. Just recently, I came across a case decided by our Supreme Court just a few months ago, where these 3 accused were exonerated. They were acquitted after spending 22 long years in jail. Yung pala, inosente sila. We have a strong perception of widespread corruption in the judiciary and among our prosecution service. Even among lawyers, there's that perception. And we have a terrible, terrible problem with vacancy rates. 20% of our trial courts are vacant, walang judge. 33% of our prosecutor positions are also vacant. And that is why we have such a weak, if not rotten, justice system. We lack judges, we lack prosecutors, we have low conviction rate, and so forth. And if government is really serious about stopping corruption and crime, about improving the state of justice in our country, the solution is to address these problems. It's not to make new laws, it's not to bring out an anti-terror law or a death penalty, but rather to focus on increasing conviction rate, creating a database that will monitor those who are serving sentence, making sure that we have justice that is speedy, addressing corruption in the judiciary, and addressing the problem of vacancies. But you might wonder, bakit ba naging ganito ang ating sistema ng hustisya? And why is nobody talking about it? When I first started talking about this issue, I felt like a voice in the wilderness. Because even among lawyers and even among members of the bar and the bench, nobody else was talking about it. But I felt so strongly that this is an issue that the people should know about. Because hindi man lang ito pinag-uusapan, and yet to me, ito ang pinakamalaking hadlang sa ating pag-asenso bilang isang bansa. Well, one of the reasons why we have come to this point is because of our history. During the Marcos dictatorship, one of the things that is seldom discussed is the kind of impact it had on our legal system. Actually, during the entire period of the dictatorship from 1972 up to 1986, the Marcoses owned every single judge and justice in the country because he could replace them anytime he wanted to, simply by signing a decree. So the judiciary was captured, judges lost their independence, and imagine what was the effect on the lawyers. Ako, haharap ako sa judge, alam ko he owes his position to Malacanang. So if I want to attract the biggest clients, I need to get also close to the powers that be. So we developed during martial law a new kind of lawyer, glorified fixers. Wala silang pakialam kung tama o makatarungan yung kaso nila. As long as they're close to the palace, they would attract the biggest clients and they'll say, dito kayo sa akin, pag akong abogado nyo, sigurado, panalo tayo. And these networks of fixers infiltrated judges, prosecutors, law enforcers, prison officials, regulatory agencies, and even some sectors of business. And that those networks still operate today. And that is why there is such a widespread perception that of corruption in the judiciary. But I have to say this, martial law also gave birth to a new breed of lawyer that we call human rights lawyers. But it was not easy for them. My father is one of those who was in the first generation of human rights lawyers. They were branded communist, subversive, enemies of the state. They were harassed, threatened, arrested, detained, tortured, and even killed. But they fought and ultimately prevailed. And I tell this to the young people all the time, dapat pasalamatan natin sila. Because if not for them, the freedoms we enjoy today would not even exist. We should be honoring, not blaming human rights defenders. But what is happening now all around us? We're being subjected to a governance by means of fear and violence. It began with the EJ case, and even under this pandemic, it continues by means of fear and violence. Netizens are arrested without warrant for posting on Facebook, taken from their homes, charged with various crimes like inciting to sedition. Even curfew violators have spent months in jail because they're poor. They cannot afford to get bail. And it's the same kind of mindset that operated during the Marcos dictatorship and which the dictatorship used so effectively. The faces have changed, but the methods are still the same. When in the 1980s, my father wrote something which to me is still so up today. He said, and I quote, "Fear need not be of communists. It may be of terrorists, gangsters, or even drug addicts and pushers nowadays. Whatever its cause, fear, carefully nurtured by the establishment, hardens into the belief that communists, terrorists, etc. have forfeited their humanity and so have forfeited their rights. Seen as posing extraordinary dangers, they justify extraordinary remedies. National defense becomes national security. Military values infiltrate society. The inevitable result is military rule or some other variant of dictatorship. And in the process, human rights blur and evanesce. Fear is a powerful motive, but an unreliable guide. It can create evils more monstrous than those it seeks to avoid. It can kill freedom while trying to preserve it. And if I may add, it can even kill the legal system while pretending to preserve it. If we really want to build a just and humane Philippines, good governance is essential. I quote from my father again. He said, "It is through honest government enforcing just laws that actual justice can be attained. I do not know of any other way." What then can we do to restore human rights and the rule of law? Well, I think number one is we can fight fear with truth. When a regime relies exclusively or mainly on fear to maintain itself in power, it becomes weakest when it looks strongest. For in time, people learn that even if they are afraid, they can nevertheless do what they should. And when they do, fear's power over them is lost. Truth is the power of the powerless, and it becomes increasingly powerful as the regime grown arrogant, continues to deny or distort reality and exaggerate its accomplishments. Second, we can stay the course. How did we surmount the fear and the absence of effective means to exert effective pressure on the regime? The answer is that we didn't. We just went ahead in spite of it. And in doing so, we found that the obstacles somehow no longer look so formidable, for the sources of strength of the regime are also the sources of weakness. Fear is contagious, but courage is not less so. I leave you with one last quotation from my father, who has really been a moving force and my inspiration through my entire life and career. And he said, "It is extremely dangerous to defend our rights, but it would be infinitely worse not to do so. If we do not struggle with all that we have and do all that we can to vindicate our rights, we not only condemn our rights to death, we also condemn our hopes and our dreams, our present, and our children's future. Which course should you choose? Only you can answer. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dean. Dean, would it be possible for us to ask some questions? Okay lang?
Sure.
All right, fantastic. Before we move forward, we'd like to remind everyone that the Dean is only available until 3:15. He has a meeting after.
30 minutes.
So we can have the question and answer until that time. If you have any questions, please post them at the chat box, or you can ask, like Boy is already asking here. And then last thing, after the last question is given and answered, we'd like to request everyone to please stay so that we can have a picture taking with our guest of honor. So first off, we'd like to call on Boy. Boy? All right, Boy Arteche.
Dean.
Yes, good afternoon.
You're my professor, Hakwan, MCLE. Dean, I have one question, Dean. Can you describe in one word this present administration of the Kong insofar as human rights and advocacy is concerned, in one word lang? And what do you intend to do about it, Dean?
Well, the one word I would choose is nothing, meaning they don't value human rights at all.
Oh my.
That's very clear from the statements of the president himself and from the way that they are conducting their government. Nakita naman po natin yan sa ating sa war on drugs, where
EJK.
The EJKs, and that has filtered down even down to the ground as far as local authorities are concerned. Marami na rin nahahawa sa kanila.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much.
Dean, there's a question from Drex Lagi. Is asking about changes to the Anti-Wiretapping Act. I think this is in relation to the Anti-Terrorism law on wiretapping. And do you trust the government to carry out lawful wiretapping activities?
It's although I am in favor of making some amendments in the old anti-wiretapping law, kasi 1954 pa yun, I am not in favor of the amendments contained in the new anti-terror law, those that changed the Wiretapping Act. Yung problema kasi, okay na sana yung dati natin terror law. Under the old Human Security Act, there were a lot of safeguards for that kind of wiretapping and surveillance, and only courts could really authorize on certain conditions only. But these have been relaxed a lot in the new anti-terror law, and therefore are much more susceptible to abuse by the authorities. I do know, if I could, however, mention the amendments that I would like to see. You know, based on the jurisprudence, there have been two, to me, limitations in the old wiretapping law. One is the requirement that all parties must consent to the wiretapping, because it sometimes gets in the way. For example, I've had several cases where prospective clients have come to me. The only evidence who were offered bribes, for example, the only evidence they have is a recording that they surreptitiously made, because obviously the person who offered them bribes is not going to say anything if they know that they're being recorded. But when they showed me the recording, I said, alam nyo po, hindi po admissible yan. Kasi under the law, a private conversation requires that you requires the consent of everybody. There are, in the US, iba ang wiretapping law nila. That kind of, when you record, let's say, a bribe or a criminal conduct, even if it's a private conversation, an admission that somebody killed somebody, that is admissible. And I think we should look in that direction as far as making an amendment with the wiretapping law. Kaya lang, as far as the anti-terror amendments are concerned, I'm very concerned about those amendments.
Thank you, Dean. We have a question from one of our youth leaders, from our Rotaractor, Charlene Tinasa. She asks, as youth of today, how can we be sure that our rights are protected and our welfare and future are secured if the ones like you that we depend on are being threatened? No? the president. And then she adds that she's concerned, just like what happened to Kian de los Santos. Could you comment on that, sir?
Well, I consider it a badge of honor to be threatened by the president. But how do we protect ourselves? Well, number one, you have to know what your rights are. And number two, you have to assert them, especially in a situation where they are being violated. But as I always stress, especially when I talk to the youth, if you're being arrested, even if your arrest was unlawful, never resist and always be polite to the people who take you into custody, because they have all the power and you're basically powerless in that situation, and you don't want to invite them to cause you any further harm than they have already done. So number one, know your rights. Number two, assert them, but of course, in some situations, as politely as you can. Number three, if ever they're violated and you can't do anything about it, then look for help from my group or from other groups to document the human rights violations, so that when the time comes, we can find some way to hold them accountable. You may not want to file now because it's not, we are under a climate of fear, but I'm sure the time will come when we can get some accountability. Thank you.
PDG Sid Garcia is asking for your list of the most objectionable provisions of the anti-terrorism law, sir.
Naku, medyo mahaba yung listahan na yan.
Maybe there's a new talk.
Actually, I do give talks on the anti-terror law. Off the top of my head, one of the most egregious provisions is the one that authorizes detention for 24 days without charges. Under the old law, the Human Security Act, which is consistent with the Constitution, you could only be held without charges for 3 days if you were arrested without warrant. Under the new law, that has been extended to 24 days, and it's not a court that will authorize your detention. It's the Anti-Terror Council, which is composed of all members of the executive department. So imagine a situation, let's say, where the president comes out with a list. He goes out on TV and says, the following people are terrorists. Then, of course, the police will follow. They will look for you. They will arrest you without warrant. Then you will demand to know what your charges are. All they have to do is go to the Anti-Terror Council, get a written authorization, and they can detain you for up to 24 days without even charging you with any kind of crime. To me, that violates the Constitution, because under the Constitution, even when martial law is declared and the writ of habeas corpus is suspended, ang maximum ay 3 days lang na pwede ka makulong na walang kaso. So that's one. The second has to do with the speech, freedom of speech, because the new law creates a new crime. It's called inciting to terrorism. I don't know if you recall, after the elections, Vice President Leni Robredo, myself, and 6 other senatorial candidates for the opposition were charged with inciting to sedition. Yung kay Bicoy, yung video ni Bicoy. Although we had nothing to do with sedition, they charged us. We had to undergo the indignity of going to the DOJ, submitting counter affidavits and so forth, before it maybe took about 6 months before the case was eventually dismissed. But I say that because may mga nagsasabi na, ba't kayo matatakot sa terrorism law kung hindi naman kayo terorista? Kami nga, hindi naman kami seditionista, pero sinampahan kami ng inciting to sedition. And now that we have a new crime called inciting to terrorism, it could, I believe, be misused and applied to critics of the government or those who are seen to be in the opposition. Those are just 2 of a long list of problems I see with that law.
Thank you, Dean. Si past President Rene Limhoco wants to suggest another principle of good governance that perhaps you can also consider, the idea of predictability. I think he's pointing to the fact that the government has a penchant of changing the rules. So that might be something for you to consider, sir. Sir, my next question again is from Drex. He has a question about the anti-child pornography law. He's saying that telcos have consistently refused to do their duty to monitor the networks. How do we resolve or cure the situation, balancing the need of protecting children versus data privacy concerns?
Well, I think if the question there is really not a question of balancing, because the overriding interest is really that of our children, and I think that should have primacy over even issues of data privacy. If especially when sa akin, the telcos in the private sector have to step up when it comes to child pornography and these kinds of issues, because mahirap man sabihin, our government is ill-equipped to really track down these people without the cooperation of the telcos. So perhaps in that regard, we can also call on them to do more to address this issue. On the issue of predictability, I totally agree that I should add that as a factor, especially when it comes to the business sector, MSMEs who are really so badly hit by this pandemic. I can imagine, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes in this situation, kasi papalit-palit, and then there doesn't seem to be a real plan as far as addressing the evidence-based solutions to this problem of the pandemic.
Thank you, Dean. We have a question from our good friend, past President Keith Harrison of the Rotary Club of Singapore, and he is also going to be our prospective member soon. He asks, where do you see the possible light in persons or organizations to make the changes that are so needed in our country?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I can say that there is a growing, amounting, many people are now waking up and pushing for change in the country, real change that will address the real problems of the country. One thing that I think has become characteristic of the state of the nation nowadays is that we are almost every day confronted with issues that divert our attention from the real issues that the country is facing. For example, we have such a big problem with unemployment. We have a big problem with the effect on the economy, the effect on MSMEs, and related issues, OFWs as well. How are we going to solve these problems? And yet, this doesn't seem to be at the top of the agenda of the government. I hope that they heed the rising voices and do something about it.
The president last night said that the human rights group should be the ones to spearhead campaigns to talk about drugs or to combat drugs. How do you react to that, sir?
Well, as I said in my talk, there he goes again. If he's really serious about addressing the drug problem, then number one, he should give our law enforcers the right expertise and equipment to track down the big fish. Because look, you cannot operate drugs in our country without electronic communication. You cannot operate drugs in our country without a money trail. Electronic din yun. Do our law enforcers have the capacity, the equipment, the resources, the know-how to track them down? Do they have even the technology? It's available, pero meron ba sila at ginagamit ba nila yon? Do they have the legal protections so that they can do this and not be vulnerable, let's say, to the big drug lords' reprisals? Yan ang kulang na kulang sa atin. It's really the certainty of punishment. If he really wants to stop crime, he should stop talking about human rights, blaming us and saying we should be the one. And he should do something himself because he has all the power. Imagine, the president has full control of our Congress. Whatever he wants, he gets. And yet, why is he not talking about improving the justice system? Why is he not filling the vacancies in the judiciary and in the prosecution service? Why is he not increasing the conviction rate? That's the real solution if we want to stop crime, terrorism, drugs, corruption. Lahat yan. It's all because we have such a rotten justice system that they get away with it. Alam ni Pangulo yan dahil dating prosecutor yan. He knows it.
I have a question.
Sure, yes.
So, thank you, Dean, for that wonderful talk. And of course, you have gone through a lot as a human rights advocate. yet somehow you remain steadfast, optimistic, and grounded. So can you tell us ways to cope in a world with which is riddled with so much injustices? How do you do it? How do you seem to be pretty much level-headed despite of everything that you have gone through? And
Well,
perhaps we can learn from you.
perhaps it's because I work a lot with young people. Almost every day I have interactions with youth groups, and I meet with them, I talk to them, we have dialogues, I speak in forums that they organize. And it's from them that I really get a lot of energy. Kasi kung tayo-tayo lang ang nag-uusap, yung older people like us, parang tendency, mabigat na tayo. We have, we're a bit compromised in some ways. All we want is to have a nice retirement and to relax. But when I interact with young people, I see the drive and their energy, and they really want. I will tell you this: they're largely misunderstood, but they want the things we want also, and they're talagang gusto nilang gumalaw na. So perhaps it would be good also for us to all have interactions with the younger people.
Dean, I hope you can be with us as we are going to have a program to have more voters registration among the youth. Maybe we can help you. We can ask you to help us also with that. Si June Lumagi had a question. June?
Well, yes, actually mine is not really a question, but more on words of appreciation. Well, I am a believer and a fan of the Dean. I admire what you're doing. And I just hope that you don't get tired of what you're doing, that you continue your advocacies despite the hurdles and insults being thrown at you. Medyo, I know that mahirap yung pinagdadaanan, and yet you still do what you're doing. So for that, I just want to let you know that, well, for me personally, I appreciate that. So again, just words of encouragement that you continue whatever you're doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you din po. Nakataba ng puso yan.
Marami hong abogado dito, lahat po kami fan nyo. No? So, and then another lawyer here has a question, very interesting. Do you intend to give the Senate another try in 2022? From Louis Asioche.
Well, we will have to wait and see. I am open to serving our country in any way and in the best way that I can. At this time, I think it's just a bit too early to make an outright decision. But bukas naman po bukas ako dun sa possibility of running.
Dean, there's a question here from past President June Obong. No? He has a question. Do you believe that we should amend the Constitution to have a two-party system or to institutionalize a two-party system in the country?
I've done a little bit of reading on that. And whenever we will, if we are talking about the party system, I think what we should develop is not a two-party system, but a three-party system. Because the problem with the two-party system is it becomes so divisive. Either you're left or you're right, you're black or you're white. When if you look at other democratic countries, they have a moderate party as well. That's more in the center in terms of the political spectrum. In some countries, that's pushed by the environmental issues. In other countries, they're just really an outright moderate and moderating force. So if ever we will get into that, I think we should consider I think a multi-party is too difficult. Having 4, 5, 6 different political parties is just, we've seen the last 20 years, I don't think it really has worked. But I wouldn't want to return to the old NP versus LP type. Palagay ko dapat may pangatlong force. And perhaps we could look into that. Some of the newer materials being produced by political scientists talk about having a three-party system.
We had a question from Drex again on funding for the Commission on Human Rights. How can we, or just disputing the image of the Commission of Human Rights as pro-communist? How do you react to that?
It's really a pity that the CHR has been painted that way, and to us in the human rights field, it's very clear. The whole purpose of the CHR is to make sure that the government follows our international obligations. Because in the international sphere, it's really when the government signs a treaty, it's binding on our government, and that's what the whole mandate of the CHR is, to make sure that we follow those obligations. But that's not to say that the CHR turns a blind eye when any person's rights are violated, even the rights of soldiers and the policemen. And in fact, they've thrown that accusation at me and other human rights defenders as well. They say, bakit pagka mga sundalo at pulis ang napapatay, tumatahimik lang kayo? Pero pag ibang tao, tinutulungan niyo agad. And my answer to that is twofold. Number one, in my career as a lawyer and human rights defender, I have also defended soldiers and policemen. There were 9 Army intelligence officers who were charged with kidnapping way back in the mid-90s, jailed for almost a year, and we were able to have them exonerated because I really believe that they were innocent. I've also represented a number of policemen. But even beyond that, the reason why many human rights defenders like me help the marginalized is because if you compare the situation, when a soldier or a policeman is killed, let's say, or his rights are violated, he has the entire machinery of government to back him up and to get justice. His colleagues in the military or in the police will do everything they can, and the entire government actually will be behind him and his family to get justice. But when a poor person in the slum area, when that person's rights are violated, sinong tutulong sa kanya? Can we expect government to be there? They will not be there. And if the abuser comes from the government itself, will anyone from government help those poor people? Walang tutulong dyan. So that's why if we have to make a choice, I help those people who have no voice and who cannot expect to get any help from any kind of government authority.
This next question I have to ask first because it's a question of my wife. No? So may I ask what your point of view is on the decision to deny the ABS-CBN franchise?
I really think it's a pity that that was the way it came out in Congress. And that's, to me, one of the results or after effects of having such a supermajority in Congress, that they just do whatever the president wants. I mean, obviously, the removal of the franchise would not have happened if the president did not get angry at ABS-CBN. That's, to me, that's not debatable. And therefore, it's really more of a giving in to his whims and desires rather than based on any objective criteria. And in fact, if you recall, during the committee hearings on the franchise, even the technical working groups who did the investigation said, wala naman kami nakitang nilabag na batas ang ABS-CBN. And therefore, we see no real impartial and objective reason why ABS should not be given the franchise. Not that ABS is completely, lily white. I mean, marami din mga issue ang ABS pagdating sa labor rights and so forth, for which they should be held accountable. But as far as the franchise is concerned, I think that is a separate issue, and that should have. It's a pity that was denied because, especially in a pandemic where our people need information, so many people were relying on ABS to get news and to find out what's happening.
We have another question from one of our youth leaders, from Vincent Naval of Miraculous Medal Sukat. What can you say about the arrest of those who criticize government via social media? He is concerned about the violation of their human rights. And what can you advise for those interested to take up a law degree? I think you have a potential student here, Dean.
Well, first, I am very concerned with what's happening, especially to netizens. I have 2 clients actually, Flag has 2 clients who were subjected to that kind of repression. One of them was simply regular Facebook guy who would post from time to time, and suddenly he received a subpoena from the NBI, Cybercrime Division. When I went to the NBI and asked, ano bang dahilan, ba't niya sinasabpina yung kliyente ko? They gave me screenshots of several posts, but when I read the post, sabi ko, this is protected speech. It's legitimate expression of opinion on a matter of public interest. And yet, he and 17 others were sent subpoenas by the NBI. We have another client who's a teacher in up north, Luzon. Meron din siyang pinost, biglang kinatok yung bahay niya. Hinuli siya ng walang warrant. He was interrogated without a lawyer, charged with inciting to sedition, but lucky for him, the trial court dismissed the case because the court said that the arrest was unlawful and the confession or the admissions were inadmissible. But it is of much concern because to me it's a pattern. There seems to be a clear attempt to make people quiet. Na tumahimik na lang kayo kasi pag magsalita kayo, baka kayo rin ay masabpina o kayo rin ay mahuli. And that is of big concern because in a democracy, the meaning of a democracy, I mean, democracy doesn't mean anything if we cannot speak the truth to power. That's what democracy is all about, is the ability to express ourselves on matters of public interest. And the fact that government authorities themselves are trying to silence people who speak truth to power is the opposite of what we should be having in a democracy. As far as taking up law is concerned, well, as I say all the time, as a lawyer, you only have two weapons. You have the weapon of speaking and the weapon of writing. So even now, if you're planning to take up law, try to improve your skills in communication, both written and oral communication. Second, you'll have to get used to reading a lot because in law school, ang dami-daming assignment yan. You're going to be reading from morning until evening. So get used to reading, especially technical material like legal literature. And third, pay attention not only to your skills, but to your values, because the biggest asset of a lawyer is his or her reputation and integrity. It's not enough that you're good in arguing or speaking. Kung wala ka namang puso, you're going to be doing things that you shouldn't be doing, and that's not going to be good for you and for our country.
Listening to the Dean, I feel like I'm back in law school. Anyway, Dean, we have a question from immediate past President Bimbo Mills. What's your take on the party list system and on election spending, and what kind of election reform should be put in place to eliminate corruption?
Well, I think that the party list system has been bastardized. Sayang, it's a good concept so that we can have non-traditional people in Congress. And the whole purpose of having a party list is so that the marginalized sectors can have representation. But as we've seen, it has become a vehicle for political families to expand their dynasties. And that's really big concern. As far as electoral spending is concerned, I share the disgust of many people over how unfair it is for there's such a big advantage given to candidates who have millions or billions of money and resources at hand, because they know that awareness is the biggest thing, and when you can spend millions for TV ads, you have a tremendous advantage over other candidates who may be just as qualified or even better, who don't have those resources. There are several solutions I think that we should think about here. One is a law that would require television networks and broadcasting in general to give equal airtime to all, let's say, national candidates. That way, hindi na mabibili ng airtime that will will level the playing field. Another is actually a proposal that came from former Chief Justice Puno, which is to create some kind of democracy fund where all money for campaigns will be taken, so that the candidate will no longer have to raise his own funds. They will just draw from that. But I'm not sure about the mechanics, how that can be done in an equal or even-handed way.
We have one last question. This is going to be our last question for today since it's already 3:15 from Past President Fidel. Past President Fidel? You're on mute, Past President Fidel. You're on mute. Fidel, you're on mute.
Mute po kayo.
Yeah. There you go.
Dean, how would you compare the human rights situations in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand? Are Filipinos subjected to more abuse by the government than the Indonesians, Thais, and Malaysians?
Well, I'm not too familiar exactly with their situation. I mean, hindi ko po na monitor na pang-araw-araw yung sitwasyon nila. But I can say that compared to where we were before this administration, I think we had a much higher level of human rights adherence in our country to theirs, to countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. Nowadays, perhaps baka magkapatas na lang tayo ngayon. It's very difficult for me to make a clear-cut judgment on that. Also because their laws are quite different from ours. Malaysia, for example, has laws that allow for prolonged preventive detention. In Thailand, as you know, it's ruled by a military, strongly influenced military government. And that makes, I think, a big difference in terms of how we compare ourselves with them.
Thank you, Dean, for your responses. Yeah. Thank you, Dean, for your responses to our questions. We're really honored to have you in our meeting today. I'd like to request everyone to please turn on your videos so that we can have a picture with the Dean before he has to leave. So everyone, please turn on your videos and give a big smile. Ron, ikaw nang mag-lead.
Okay, 1, 2. Okay, isa pa. Two more. Okay, one last. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
Peter, your response to our speaker, Peter. President Peter.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you, PP Reggie. There is a reason our 1987 Constitution devoted one article, Article 3, the Bill of Rights, listing down the basic inviolable rights of every Filipino citizen. The Bill of Rights defines the relationship of the people to the state. It enumerates the rights of its citizens and sets the limits of the lawful powers of the state. That reason, as earlier cited by our eminent speaker, is found in Section 1, Article 2, that provides sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. We have all witnessed the government's past year's performance and its position on human rights. And we beg the question, does the concept of human rights conflict with good governance? In the book, Human Rights, Protection, and Good Governance by Pradeep Kuman, published in January 2018, it says, good governance is most likely to occur when the government sector has high-quality public sector institutions, just like as cited by our speaker earlier, a strong judicial system, and when the nation has a strong civil society. Human rights protection is a norm which a legal system portrays through good governance. Both the concepts are intrinsic to each other, that one cannot be conceptualized without the other. Good governance promotes human rights, while human rights are a source of good governance. The basic purpose of good governance is to promote the human dignity and status, such that whenever human dignity is wounded, civilization takes a step backward. Let me repeat an excerpt of that citation. Human rights and good governance are intrinsic to each other. Good governance promotes human rights, and human rights are a source of good governance. Thank you, Dean Chel Diokno, for sharing to us today your insights on good governance and human rights. Just like Pipe Reggie and Attorney Boy, I have always enjoyed attending your lectures in
MCLE.
our MCLE seminars.
Yes.
We have seen and witnessed human rights lawyers and advocates conduct themselves, the likes of Attorney Rene Sagisag, as well as that of our very own, the late Attorney Frank Chavez. And I must say, you're different. You are one soft-spoken human rights advocate. Maybe that's the trademark of a Diokno. For even our own Mon Diokno displays such cool under pressure demeanor. Senator Diokno. Wait, did I say senator? It must have been my subconscious thinking aloud.
Okay.
I hope you will continue working on your advocacies on good governance and human rights, whether as a private citizen or as a future public official.
Yeah.
We need people like you to remind us that there is hope amidst all this madness and uncertainties around us. So, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati, our lovely aunts, our district governor Chacha Camacho is with us today. The other Rotarians from the different Rotary clubs in our district, especially to my classmates, the Perfect Vision presidents, our Rotaractors, and all the other guests in attendance, please accept our heartfelt gratitude for taking time and sharing with us your insights on good governance and human rights. Once again, thank you, Dean Chel Diokno. Thank you. And as token of appreciation for your time in service, we shall be giving you a copy of our 50th anniversary coffee table book, which contains our club's 50 years of community service and fellowship, of course, together with a bottle of red wine to enjoy while going to the pages of our book. So thank you, Dean Chel Diokno.
Thank you, Chel.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Kamu nga salamat.
Dean, if you need to already leave, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much.
Papaalam na po ako. Thank you. Thank you.
Sige po. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
At this point, I'd like to move on to the next part of our program. Actually, what we have now is just to introduce our visiting guests. Right now, we have, at one point, we were 130 participants in this Zoom call. I'd just like to point out that we have present our District Governor Chacha Camacho, PDG Digna Ragasa, who was also with us. The following are the classmates of our president who was here: Gabi Felix, Teresita Marquez, Carlo Busmente, Lynn Bentoy, Maria Ira Ruth, Alba Dibi, Eldrick Ginto, Larry Samaniego, Lyra Vasquez. Looks like all the PVPs are here. So Mache Ackerman, of course, CP Mache, Edrolin Garma, Bingbing Rubio, Janet Barreto Lapus, Ann Acuña, Mark Willem, Christy Aldave, Kathy Ronquito, Fernan Mabanta, Ricky Trinidad, Stella Ignacio, Gregory James D, Chichi De Leon, Lailani Opeña, Angelito Manuel, Riz Quintana, Jacqueline Emoclin, June Obong, Rowena Reyes, Bong Lim, Marlon Bumanlag. The children of our president are also listening in. Very good. Let's reach out to our youth. And then, of course, yung mga RAC Makati members natin, no? Si Cash is here, Philip, Neil, Karil, and Charlene. And I mentioned earlier, RAC Miraculous Medal, no? Si Vincent, si Joshua, Ralph, and Shekina. And then we also have other guests with us: Glenn Albano, Yolanda Albano, Tina Cadano, Tina Castor, Marisa Enriquez, Erin Nicole Fernandez, again from Hawaii. I know that's that much. Si Reggie Ponferrada, my guest and future Rotarian also. And then, of course, Keith Harrison, which I mentioned earlier. Jennifer Ignacio,
Yeah.
Rina Lopez, Nes Olitoquit, Estrella La Morena, and Rainer Don Sanchez. So we have a lot of guests here today. So again, thank you very much for being with us.
Yes.
And we'd like to welcome you to our club.
Yes.
I don't have the list of the birthday and the wedding celebrators.
Doesn't matter.
So, meron ako report second meeting ni Glenn Albano.
Thank you. Okay. Ayun, no, ang birthday celebrants natin. Taba Samson, Vic Floresca. From our aunt, si Elena Coyuto, Kathy Yu, Angela Garcia, Micah Tambunting, and Terry Robbins. And wedding anniversaries, Andrew and Maida, Prieto, and PDG Sid, and Tesha Garcia on the 27th. So congratulations, and God bless all of you on your birthdays and wedding anniversary celebrations. And then for next part of our program, there's a turnover of the donation for the HEAL program. So we'd like to give it back to our president and to our staff there for the turnover of a donation for the HEAL program to Miss Maria Severina Cadano, program director of our HEAL program. So we'll have a little picture taking.
Peter.
Yan, no?
Okay.
The Multinational Foundation, Inc. Wow, we're giving 355,865 pesos. Very good.
Bakit may tingi pa na 865?
Bakit nga daw may tingi?
Okay.
Dagdagan.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's how exactly you are. No?
Yes.
One more.
Congratulations, and we look forward to our programs together. Again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in our meeting today. It was a pleasure having you with us. And at this point, we'd like to give it to President Peter for the adjournment.
What do you call it? Medallion.
President Peter, adjournment.
Mute ka, Peter.
All right.
May tumawag.
Okay, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much for coming.
All right.
Thank you, and see you in our next meeting.
Doon. Dito na lang.
Distance ka lang.
Saan dito? Okay. Nagkikita natin si Peter at si George na ano.
Okay.
Wow.
Ano na siya?
Major.